The creek was running low that August, the way it always did toward the end of summer, and the dust on the South Trail hadn't settled since the Callaway freight wagons came through 3 days prior. That was the kind of summer Heron Flats had. Dry, slow, and quiet enough that a man working alone could hear his own thoughts a little too clearly. Nathaniel Greer was 52 years old, and he had been hearing his thoughts too clearly for going on 7 years. He owned 43 acres on the eastern edge of town, a cattle operation modest enough that he ran it himself with one hired hand who came Tuesdays and Fridays. His wife, Caroline, had passed in the winter of 1879, and after that Nathaniel had pulled himself inward the way a tortoise pulls into its shell, not out of bitterness, exactly, but out of a kind of exhaustion that only people who have lost someone they built their whole life around will understand. He still went to church. He still nodded to his neighbors. He still brought extra firewood to old Mrs. Corbett when the temperature dropped. But he had stopped expecting anything from the days except the ordinary work of them. He was mending the south gate that morning when he heard the wheel, not the sound of a wagon rolling, the sound of one that wasn't. A grinding, halting, lopsided sound that meant trouble, coming from the direction of the creek crossing. He set down his tools and looked up. The buggy was listing badly to the right. One rear wheel had dropped into a soft patch of creek bank, and the horse, a patient, pale gray mare, had stopped moving entirely, ears back, waiting for someone to figure out the situation. The driver had climbed down and was standing in the shallow mud, hands on her hips, studying the wheel with the focused expression of someone who intends to solve a problem with nothing but determination and a clear head. She was 27 years old. Nathaniel learned that later. In the moment, he only knew that she was young and alone and entirely unbothered by the fact that she was standing in creek mud in what had clearly been a good pair of boots that morning. Her name was Adelaide Finch. She had arrived in Heron Flats 6 weeks prior to take over the county's land assay office, a position that, according to the postmaster, had never in its 12-year history been held by a woman. The postmaster had shared this information with Nathaniel the week Adelaide arrived in the tone of a man who expected to be agreed with. Nathaniel had said only, "Well, now it has," and bought his stamps. He walked down to the creek crossing. "Morning," he said. She looked up. She had dark eyes and a practical face, the kind of face that didn't waste expressions on things that didn't warrant them. She looked at him the way she'd been looking at the wheel. Assessing. "Morning," she said. Wheels sunk about 4 inches into soft clay. "You'll spin it deeper if the horse pulls forward." "I know," she said. "I was about to go back for a plank." "I have one," Nathaniel said. 20 yards up, at the gate." She looked at him for a moment. Not suspiciously, more like she was deciding whether accepting help from a stranger fell within the boundaries of how she preferred to operate. Apparently it did, because she gave a short nod. "All right." He fetched the plank. He wedged it under the rear wheel while she held the mare steady. The horse pulled forward on her quiet command, and the buggy came free with a low sucking sound from the mud. Adelaide guided it up to solid ground, checked the wheel for damage, checked the axle, and then turned to retrieve the plank herself before Nathaniel had a chance to. She handed it back to him. "Thank you, Mr. Greer," he said. "Nathaniel Greer. I've got the Greer parcel, the other side of the road." "Miss Adelaide Finch," she said, "Land Assay Office." She said it not proudly but plainly, like stating a fact. "I appreciate the help. Glad to give it." She climbed back into the buggy, turned the mare, and continued up the trail toward town. Nathaniel watched her go, then walked back to his gate and picked up his tools. The sun had moved about 20 minutes across the sky. He went back to mending the post. He thought about her for the rest of the afternoon. He wasn't sure why. He was 52. She was clearly young, clearly capable, and clearly not someone who needed anyone's help for longer than a plank's worth of time. He told himself he was just thinking about the wheel, wondering if the axle would hold. He wasn't thinking about the wheel. Adelaide Finch had come to Heron Flats because it was where the job was. That was the honest answer, the one she gave to people who asked with genuine curiosity. The longer answer, the one she kept to herself, was that Heron Flats was far enough from Knoxville that her father's opinions about what a woman of 27 ought to be doing with her time would take at least 3 days to reach her by post, and by then she'd already be doing something else. She had studied land surveying and cartographic record-keeping under her uncle, who ran the county office in Millbrook and who had unusually, for a man of his generation, believed that precision mattered more than the gender of the person practicing it. When he retired and recommended Adelaide for the Heron Flats position, the county board had deliberated for 2 weeks before concluding that her qualifications were, in fact, superior to the other applicants. Adelaide had been informed of this by letter. She had written back accepting the position and had not mentioned it to her father until she was already packed. She was good at her work. This was the simplest truth about Adelaide Finch. She was very good at her work, and she had organized her entire life around being in a position to do it. She boarded with a woman named Mrs. Corbett on Maple Street. The same Mrs. Corbett Nathaniel brought firewood to, though Adelaide didn't know that yet. The room was small but had good light, which was what mattered for the drafting she did in the evenings. She kept her field equipment clean and her records meticulously organized. She was polite to everyone she met. She did not go out of her way to be liked. She thought about the man at the creek crossing for most of the ride back to town. Not about him, about what he'd said. You'll spin it deeper if the horse pulls forward. He'd known, immediately, without studying the situation for more than a moment. 43 acres would do that to a man. She filed this information in the quiet part of her mind where she kept facts that might be useful later. They ran into each other again a week later, in front of the hardware store. Nathaniel was coming out with a coil of fence wire and very nearly walked into Adelaide, who was standing on the boardwalk with a surveying notebook open in one hand and a look of mild impatience directed at a barrel of roofing nails that was not the quantity she'd ordered. "The nails," she said, to no one in particular, then looked up and recognized him. "Mr. Greer, Miss Finch." He shifted the wire to his other shoulder. "The nails giving you trouble?" "The hardware store appears to have interpreted 8-pound keg as 4-pound keg," she said. "I've flagged it. They're correcting it." She paused. "You're out this way early." "Fence wire," he said. "North Pasture's been giving me trouble since spring." "The flooding?" He nodded. "Posts went soft. I've been getting to it in sections." He wasn't sure why he was telling her this. She was listening in the same focused way she'd looked at the wheel. Not politely, but actually listening, taking in information. "The county maps show the north drainage runs close to your property line," she said. "If you want, I can pull the survey and tell you whether the water lines shifted. It happens after a hard spring." He looked at her. She said it the way she'd said everything, like a fact, not an offer of special consideration, like it was simply the logical next step. "I'd appreciate that," he said. "I'll check the records this week," she said. And then the hardware store clerk appeared with the corrected nails, and she turned her attention back to business, and Nathaniel went home with his fence wire. He told himself, walking home, that she was simply thorough, a professional, that she'd have said the same to anyone with a drainage question. He was 52 years old, and he had been alone long enough to know the difference between a woman being professional and a woman choosing to continue a conversation. He wasn't sure which one that had been. He wasn't sure it mattered. She brought the survey notes to him on a Thursday. She rode out to the Greer parcel in the late afternoon, tied her mare to the post by the barn, and walked across the yard to where Nathaniel was stacking wood near the side of the house. He had not been expecting her. He set down the log in his hands and wiped his palms on his trousers. The water lines moved 14 feet northeast since the last official survey in 1874, she said, handing him a folded document, which means about 30 yards of your north fence line is technically on county easement land. You're not in violation. The easement allows for agricultural use, but you should know it in case there's ever a question. He opened the document. He looked at it for a long moment. I didn't even know to ask for this, he said. Most people don't, she said. The records exist. Nobody looks at them. He folded it carefully and looked at her. The afternoon light was coming at a low angle, catching the dust still in the air from his woodpile. She was looking at the barn with a professional assessment that softened. Briefly, when a gray cat emerged from behind the woodpile and sat down near her boot. She looked down at it. Something in her face changed, something quick and almost hidden, like a door opening for half a second before someone remembered to close it. That's Samuel, Nathaniel said. Hello, Samuel, she said quietly, and she bent down and let him sniff her hand, which the cat did with the absolute authority of someone granting permission. Samuel then sat back down and regarded her with satisfaction. He doesn't usually do that, Nathaniel said. He ignores most people. Animals know things, she said. She straightened up, and then, because she seemed to realize she'd shown something, she picked up the professional composure she'd set down for a moment and put it back on. The drainage sketch is on the back of the survey. If you have questions about the boundary markers, the office has the original stakes on record. Thank you, Miss Finch, he said. Would you? I have coffee on Froome if you wanted to sit a minute before the ride back. She looked at him, the assessment again, then at the low sun, then back at him. All right, she said. Just a few minutes. They sat on the porch. She took her coffee black. He had put out a small plate of sugar cookies that Mrs. Corbett had given him. He almost didn't, thought it might seem like he was making too much of it, then put them out anyway. Adelaide took one without comment and ate it in 2 bites. They talked about the drainage. They talked about the county survey records and how far behind they were. They talked about the 2 years Adelaide had spent in the field in eastern Tennessee before she came here, reading elevation changes in land that had been logged too hard and was sliding slowly back down into the valleys. Nathaniel listened. He asked questions when he had them, not to fill the silence, but because he actually wanted to know. He noticed that she seemed slightly surprised by this, and then seemed to decide not to be surprised, and then seemed quietly to relax. The sun went the rest of the way down. She stood up and said she should get back. Miss Finch, he said. She turned. I appreciate it. Not just the survey, all of it. She looked at him for a moment. It's my job, she said. The coffee wasn't, he said. Something crossed her face. Not a smile exactly, more like the thought of one. Good evening, Mr. Greer, she said, and went to get her mare. She ate supper alone that night in the small room at Mrs. Corbett's house. She had a book open on the table and didn't read a page of it. She sat with her fork halfway to her mouth for a long time, looking at nothing in particular, thinking about a man who had put out cookies he'd been given by his neighbor and then almost hadn't, and who had asked her real questions, and who had a cat named Samuel who decided within 30 seconds that she was acceptable. Adelaide Finch had been taking care of herself since she was 19. She had learned how to read a landscape, how to hold her own in rooms full of men who doubted her, how to make a decent life out of whatever materials were at hand. She was good at being alone. She had organized herself so completely around not needing anyone that the need, when she felt it, didn't even feel like need at first. It felt like an inconvenience, like a creek crossing gone wrong. She closed the book. She washed her plate. She went to bed and lay in the dark for a long time listening to the wind in the cottonwoods, thinking about how a person could know, with complete certainty, that they preferred their life quiet and uncomplicated, and still feel something clench very quietly in their chest when a man looked at them like they had said something worth remembering. Now, before I go on, I want to stop for just a moment. If you're listening to this story right now, I'd love to know where in this beautiful world you're tuning in from. Whether it's a town like Heron Flats, small and quiet and full of good people doing ordinary things, or a big city, or somewhere in between, drop it in the comments below. Tell me where you're from. And if this story is moving something in you tonight, give it a like. It helps more than you know, and it tells me to keep these stories coming. All right, let's get back to Nathaniel and Adelaide. He was 52. He knew what it was like to have loved someone so completely that losing her felt like losing the part of yourself that knew how to want things. He had not expected to feel anything again, not because he'd decided not to, but because, after a while, the wanting just went quiet. The way a creek goes quiet in August. Still there, but not making much noise about it. Adelaide Finch made noise about everything without raising her voice. She was specific and precise, and she said exactly what she meant. He found that he had missed that. He had not known he missed it until it was standing on his porch, drinking black coffee and talking about elevation changes in eastern Tennessee. He was also not foolish. He knew what 52 looked like next to 27. He knew what people would say, what they were probably already saying, because this was Heron Flats, and he had been out to the assay office twice in 2 weeks on survey business that could have been handled by post. He knew that she was at the beginning of her life, and he was deep in the middle of his, maybe even edging toward the other side of it. He didn't say any of this to anyone. He just kept mending his fence and stacking his wood and bringing Mrs. Corbett her firewood on Saturdays. And he thought about Adelaide Finch with the specific patience of a man who had learned, the hard way, that some things could not be forced. It was Mrs. Corbett herself who said something. She was a sharp-eyed woman of 71 who had been in Heron Flats since before it was called that, and she had the particular perception of someone who had spent a long time watching people move through their own lives without understanding what they were doing. She brought it up one Saturday in October while Nathaniel was stacking wood on her porch. "My boarder speaks well of you," she said. Nathaniel set down a log. "That's kind of her. It's accurate, is what it is. She doesn't speak well of people as a social habit. She speaks accurately." Mrs. Corbett folded her hands in her lap. "She mentioned you asked her to look at your north survey 3 weeks ago. Then she mentioned you came by the office to discuss the stakes. Then she mentioned you lent her a rain slicker last Tuesday when she got caught out on the north property line." Nathaniel said nothing. "I'm 71 years old," Mrs. Corbett said pleasantly. "I've seen a lot of people try to pretend they're not doing a thing they're clearly doing. You're not particularly good at it." "She's 27, Nathaniel said. "I'm 52. "I'm aware," said Mrs. Corbett. "I'm not asking you to explain anything to me. I'm just telling you what I see. What you do with it is your own business." She looked out at the yard. "She eats alone every night, Mr. Greer. She reads her books and she does her work, and she doesn't let anyone close enough to matter. That's not a person who's happy. That's a person who's decided being unhappy alone is safer than being happy with someone who might leave." Nathaniel picked up another log. "I'm aware," he said quietly. "Good," said Mrs. Corbett, and that was the end of it. He asked her to supper. Not at his place, at the hotel dining room in town, which was the closest thing Heron Flats had to a proper restaurant, and which had as its main advantage a level of public visibility that made it clear he wasn't asking for anything other than supper. He came to the assay office on a Wednesday afternoon, hat in hand. Adelaide was at her drafting table, head down, working. She looked up when he came in, and he saw her file something away in her expression before she spoke. "Mr. Greer, Miss Finch, I wanted to ask, if you're not otherwise engaged Saturday evening, whether you'd have supper with me at the Callaway Hotel." She looked at him steadily. "As what?" she said. He appreciated that she asked. "As two people having supper," he said. "And if that goes well, I'd like to ask again sometime. and I want you to know what I'm asking so you can answer honestly." The room was quiet. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside, someone's horse objected to something. "I know what you're asking," she said at last. "I know you do." She looked down at her drafting table. She looked at the window. She looked back at him with the expression of someone working out a problem that doesn't have a clean surveyed answer. "Saturday," she said. 6 o'clock, he nodded. "I'll be there at 6, he said. "Thank you, Miss Finch Adelaide," she said. It came out quietly, like she'd decided it a second before she said it, and wasn't sure yet if it was the right decision. "You can call me Adelaide." "Nathaniel," he said. She looked back down at her map. He put his hat on and left. He walked home in the October afternoon with the particular lightness of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just, for a moment, set it down. Supper was 2 hours. They ate roast chicken and talked for 2 hours, and Nathaniel walked her home and said good night at Mrs. Corbett's gate, and then he walked home and couldn't sleep, and that was that. They had supper again the following Saturday, and the one after that. By November, Adelaide had stopped looking at him with the assessing expression and started looking at him in a different way entirely, a way that she clearly wasn't always aware of, and that she seemed faintly exasperated to catch herself doing. People talked, of course. This was Heron Flats. The postmaster had opinions. 2 women at the church had a conversation in Adelaide's presence that was designed for her to overhear regarding the appropriate and natural order of things. Adelaide had listened without reaction, and then, when they finished, had said pleasantly, "Thank you," and walked out. She told Nathaniel about it over supper that Friday, and he watched her face while she talked, the controlled steadiness of it, and thought about what Mrs. Corbett had said. That's a person who's decided being unhappy alone is safer. "Does it bother you?" he asked. She considered this honestly. "Less than I thought it would," she said. "Which surprises me. Why?" She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "Because I've spent most of my life in rooms where people thought I was doing something I shouldn't be. I got used to that." She paused. "This feels different, like they think I'm wrong, not just what I'm doing." She looked up at him. "I don't like that as much." "You're not wrong," he said. She looked at him with something that was almost finally a real smile. "No," she said. "I know that. It's just loud is all." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. He hadn't planned it. It was just the thing his hand did. She looked down at his hand, his big, scarred rancher's hand covering her ink-stained surveyor's hand, and she didn't move away. "I'm 52 years old," he said. "I want you to know I understand what that means. I understand what I'm asking from you." "You're not asking anything from me," she said quietly. "You've never asked me for anything I didn't choose to give." He turned her hand over gently and she let him. "Adelaide," he said, "I'd like to court you properly if you'll have me. I want to be clear about that. I'm not asking for anything else, not rushing anything, but I want you to know that's where I stand." She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the dining room noise seemed to recede a little, like the world giving them a moment of privacy. "Nathaniel," she said finally, "I'm 27 years old. I have worked very hard to build a life that doesn't depend on anyone." "I know," he said. "And I'm not going to stop working," she said. "That's not negotiable. I would never ask you to." She looked at him for a moment. "You're not like the other men," she said. "Who've asked?" "No. They wanted to be proud of me from a distance," she said. "You actually listen to what I say." He waited. "Yes," she said simply. "You can court me, Nathaniel." He let out a breath. "Thank you," he said quietly. She looked down at their joined hands. "Don't thank me," she said. "You did most of the work." But the corner of her mouth curved, and there it was at last, a real, full Adelaide Finch smile, which was a small and private thing, but which, once you'd seen it, was very hard to stop thinking about. They were married the following April, on a morning when the cottonwoods were just beginning to leaf out, and the creek was running full and clear from the spring snow. Mrs. Corbett sat in the front pew and cried, which she denied afterward, but which was witnessed by everyone present. Adelaide wore a dress the color of sage. Not white, she had decided, because she was not the kind of woman to do anything simply for the look of it. She carried a small bunch of prairie flowers that Nathaniel had found somewhere and tied with a piece of twine, and she looked down at them while she waited at the back of the church, with the expression of someone who has solved a very long and difficult equation and is just now seeing the answer clearly. Nathaniel stood at the front of the church in his good coat and watched the door open. He was 52 years old, and he had been alone for 7 years, and he had spent the better part of those 7 years learning, slowly, and with great difficulty, to want nothing. And then Adelaide Finch had driven her buggy into a soft bank of creek clay on a dry August morning, and looked at the wheel with the focused expression of someone who solves problems, and everything he had trained himself not to want had come back to him as quietly and completely as water returning to a dry creek bed after a hard spring rain. She walked toward him. She was 27, and she was precise, and she was not sentimental, except that her eyes were bright in a way she wasn't controlling. When she reached him, he took her hand. "You ready?" he said quietly. "I've been ready," she said. "I just needed the right starting point." The Reverend began to speak. Outside, the cottonwoods moved in the spring wind. Samuel the cat, unbeknownst to either of them, was at that exact moment accepting a piece of chicken from Mrs. Corbett's kitchen and had declared the whole situation satisfactory. That story, Nathaniel and Adelaide, and a buggy wheel sunk in creek clay, stays with me because of what it isn't. It isn't a grand romance with a dramatic rescue. It's two people, busy with their own lives, recognizing something in each other that they hadn't expected to find. A man who had stopped wanting things, a woman who had organized herself so carefully around not needing anyone that the need surprised her when it showed up. And it showed up as a plank of wood, as a folded survey document, as a plate of sugar cookies put out despite uncertainty, as a gray cat named Samuel making a decision in 30 seconds that took two human beings several months to reach. The strongest people I have ever known are not the ones who needed nothing. They are the ones who were brave enough, eventually, to say, "I choose you. I am choosing to let this matter to me." That is the bravest sentence in the English language, and it is available to anyone, at any age, on any ordinary morning. May God bless every one of you listening tonight, whether you are 27 or 52 or somewhere in between, whether you are in the middle of something or at the beginning of something, or standing outside a door you have not yet opened. I hope you find your plank of wood. I hope you find someone who listens to what you actually say. This is Prairie Hearts. Keep writing, friends. Keep writing.